Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Thousands rally at the state capitol to protest funding cuts to higher education and voice support for a millionaire's tax initiative. A new lawsuit seeks to restore voting rights to inmates who have been shifted from state to county oversight because of realignment. 1 year after Japan's devastating quake and tsunami, the U.S. government proposes major cuts to our own country's tsunami alert system. And a look into the seismic safety of Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant by the Center for Investigative Reporting and Al Jazeera.
This may be the facility that, if something does go wrong, could be our Fukushima.
Coming up next. Hello, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel tonight are Bobby Gelko, San Francisco Chronicle reporter, Paul Rogers, San Jose Mercury News environment writer, and Nanette Asimov, San Francisco Chronicle reporter. Nanette, big march up in Sacramento, thousands of students out there. What exactly were they demanding or hoping for?
Well, you know, I've been to a lot of protests, and every year tens of thousands really go up and demand a cut to that the state stop cutting. But this year was really different because they were so focused. The students knew that they wanted the millionaire's tax, which is earmarked for education. They were for it. They are against cuts to the Cal Grant, and they want an oil extraction tax. So they were very focused this year. And another thing that really made this year's protest different was the Occupy movement. Once the outside protests were all gone and the buses took many students home, others stormed into the Capitol. And it was pretty much the strangest thing I've ever seen to see pretty much dozens of students roaming around the halls and dancing in the rotunda, the ornate rotunda. There were students who were climbing on this 100-year-old marble statue of a queen, and then you had the CHP officers just sort of like, you know, very stoic, standing around, allowing them to do this until the Capitol closed and the arrests began.
So did they hear anything or hear from anyone that would indicate to them that they were heard by the right people?
Yeah. You know, it's funny, the student protests really do seem to get heard. They don't get everything they want. Tuition keeps rising. But for instance, this week, a very influential panel of the Assembly Budget Finance Committee, they decided pretty much that the Cal Grant cuts were dead in the water. Jerry Brown wants to cut Cal Grants to help solve this $9 billion budget gap that we have. And he thought he would do it by, you know, an easy $300 million cutting Cal Grants. This Assembly panel said, no, you will not do that, and they're not for it. It doesn't play well, and that's pretty dead in the water. So
Jerry isn't. I mean, I remember when he was like the youngest governor
ever. We're talking about the governor here.
Yeah,
right.
Jerry Brown.
Jerry.
So okay, Jerry Brown, you know, I guess likes to portray himself as a friend of public education, and in fact, he does have a tax proposal that he says would help education among other stress programs. But Brown does not seem to be beloved among the students there, and I guess they took issue with his initiative, his proposed initiatives. That's a rival of the proposed millionaire's tax.
Well, some of the students said, you know, okay, so there's a few tax proposals that are not yet made on the ballot, but the students want the millionaire's tax, and Jerry Brown wants a broader tax increase that would expire after 5 years. And if you ask the students what they think about the Brown tax, a number of them will say, what Brown tax? Because the millionaire tax has a very catchy name. You know, tax the millionaires. It's fabulous, and it plays well, and it does well in the polls. Jerry Brown's tax is sort of seen as an opposition to what the students want. So the students are not
It
for
includes
that.
a rather large sales tax, or
Yeah,
a substantial sales tax increase too.
Just a quick interpretation, the millionaire's tax.
Okay.
What would it do?
So what the students want is to have it would not expire, and it's a tax on the income tax of those earning more than $1 million in California. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, pretty sexy. Governor Brown would have a half-cent sales tax imposed, and then those earning, I believe, $250,000 a year or more would have their income tax increased. And that would expire after 5 years. And the benefit that Brown sees is that he would get to spend this revenue to solve the state's budget problem in a variety of areas. It would not just be earmarked for education. The millionaire's tax would be not only education, a few other programs, but largely for education.
They may both end up getting on the ballot, and maybe an oil extraction tax and this other tax by Molly Munger, the millionaire that would tax everybody's income. Do we have any sense of what leverage at all he has over the teachers' unions and the students to keep the millionaire's tax off the ballot? Because he clearly believes that if they're both on the ballot, or more than one is on the ballot, if more than three are on the ballot, they'll all go down.
Right.
But what power does he have to get the side that supports the millionaire's tax to drop their efforts?
Well, he's got a powerful argument. Whether it will wash, we don't know. What he's saying is that if his tax initiative does not pass, then there will be a series of trigger cuts to higher education and other services that would be devastating. We saw them already in 2011. And higher education suffered, mid-year tax cuts, and he's saying the same thing would happen if his tax does not pass. So it's a powerful argument.
Do you think the students trust the governor that if his tax passed, that they will be treated more generously by the way he divide whatever money comes in?
Not from what I've heard. These are all very nuanced arguments, and right now the students are hearing what they want to hear, which is, you're for us or you're against us. You want to cut Cal grants? Well, that's our, ticket into higher education, and if you cut that, you're a bad guy. So that's how things are playing out right now in this sort of protest-happy environment.
But it's a great question, because there are a lot of other concerns in the state. The state has a $9 billion deficit. We've cut money for the blind, the disabled. We've cut money for, we're closing a quarter of the state park system. There are a lot of other needs in the state, and there is no guarantee that if Brown's tax is the only one that passed, that the students would get all the money they want. I mean, some people look at that and say, look, a lot of these folks are middle class, and they should pay more if the state is suffering, and we should give more of the money to the poorest. Right, the blind, the elderly, the disabled, and I don't know that anything Jerry Brown says will satisfy each individual group who wants the money for their own thing.
Oh, we'll turn to Bob, where there's another issue that I'm sure is going to be debatable, and that is the right of prisoners or ex-felons to vote.
Yes, this has to do with another Jerry Brown plan that is in effect now, called realignment, and frequently talked about. But what it has basically done is take people considered low-level felons, not convicted of violent crimes, nor serious, nor sex crimes, drug possession, and a variety of other things, and sentence them to county jail instead of state prison. And when they are paroled from state prison for these same crimes, put them under county supervision rather than state parole. This was in response to a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that said that the state has to lower their prison population, the overcrowded prisons, by more than 30,000 in 2 years to make conditions possible so that the health care in prison will meet constitutional standards. That was realignment. The lawsuit filed by the ACLU and others on behalf of the League of Women Voters and some prisoners' rights groups says these former prisoners who are being realigned, sent to county custody, no longer should have the disabilities that we assign to people who are, quote, imprisoned or on state parole. And that's the definition in the state constitution approved by the voters. If you're imprisoned or on state parole, you can't vote in California. But if you're not, if you're in county custody, you do. And the thinking is, not only did we change the beds and change the addresses of these people, we changed their status. We are putting them back into the community for better or for worse, and they should regain their voting rights. Now, Secretary of State Deborah Bowen, the top elections official and a Democrat, found to the contrary in an opinion in December that she sent out to all the county registrars. She said these people, they may be in county jail and there's going to be upwards of 85,000 of them as of June 2013. But they're still serving felony time. They're still doing the equivalent of parole, and that they do not have voting rights. So the lawsuit before a state court of appeal said, you know, voting rights are supposed to be interpreted broadly. The franchise is important to people being integrated back into the community. These folks should have the right to vote, and they're going to leave it up to the courts.
Isn't there another element to this too, and that is the makeup of the prison population that we're talking about? Large numbers of minorities.
Yeah, and it's certainly one argument that that is made, you know, not just here, but in voting rights cases in general, and in felony disenfranchisement in general, which is pretty much nationwide. Maine and Vermont are the only two states that allow imprisoned felons to vote, but it is heavily, disproportionately minority, and that's one reason that the lawsuit says these laws, these felony disenfranchisement laws, should not be interpreted broadly, or to put it another way, that voting rights should get the benefit of the doubt. If there's some question about the status of these people, they should have the right to vote, because that's a democratic value. It's a strong argument. Whether it sells with the courts, I don't know. I doubt it would sell with the public.
This, Bob, because California has one of the lowest voter turnouts in the country. So, are felons, convicted felons, really clamoring for the right to vote? And who's really behind this? Are they just demanding the right to vote suddenly?
Hard to say. Although two of the plaintiff groups are prisoners' rights groups.
Mm-hmm.
It's families of prisoners with children, and a group called All of Us or None, in addition to the League of Women Voters. So there's some advocacy on behalf of at least former prisoners. But some of the voices that you hear are like from people in reentry programs, people trying to reintegrate people into the community, and they say voting is part of community membership. And it's one way to tell people, you're a citizen again. You have a stake, you have a voice, you maybe have a route to power. And there's a different context here too. Nationwide, 30 states now have voter ID laws, mostly Republican-sponsored, and they tend to limit the ability to go to the polls, particularly, again, with the elderly, with minorities, with people who are less likely to have photo IDs. There is this national campaign going on, and a pushback from some Democrats as well.
But there are a number of issues that are going to be before voters too this November. We'll be voting about the death penalty.
Yes, we
we'll
will.
be talking about 3 strikes, whether some people should be resentenced in a different way. All of these issues about prisoners and their rights coming at one time, how do you think that is going to play out in public discourse in an election year?
I don't think that that prisoners' rights would pass in too many elections. I mean, look at the record on crime initiatives. Almost all of them pass. It'd be interesting to me to see if there is any more support for repeal of the death penalty than there has been in the past. It doesn't seem to be the way it polls. But of course, that's why the ACLU and League of Women Voters has gone to the court and not the ballot box. And it's interesting to me too that the Deborah Bowen, the Democratic Secretary of State, took the opposite position. It could be that she's right or arguable on the law, but she didn't take the position to expand voting rights here. It doesn't seem to be an issue that Democrats are coming out in front on to be advocates for felons. I mean, it's not a very popular constituency.
So quickly, where is this in court, and when do we hear about it next?
It was filed with the State Court of Appeal in San Francisco, a court that potentially can issue a statewide ruling, and they're asking them to, do something quickly so these folks can vote in the 2012 election.
All right, Bob. Well, this weekend marks the 1-year anniversary of the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, a disaster which wiped out entire communities, claimed 20,000 lives, and triggered a nuclear meltdown. The tsunami also caused $58 million in damage along the Northern California coast, wrecking the Santa Cruz and Crescent City harbors. Paul Rogers, you were in Santa Cruz. You were watching the tsunami as it hit. Describe what it was like then and what has happened since.
Yeah, I was standing on the bridge right there, actually, looking down as it came in that morning, and It was unbelievable. I have lived in Santa Cruz for 23 years and I've never seen anything like that. The waves went way back at first. There were surfers in some places who were surfing fairly far off the beach, and they were suddenly just standing on dry land. These were teenagers. A few of them realized what was happening and started to run toward the shore. It wasn't like one big giant, cartoon wave like you'd see. It was a steady surge of water, like a swell that came in 3 or 4 feet high, maybe 5, 6 feet high at times, that just didn't stop. It just kept pushing. And so when it came under that bridge into the Santa Cruz Harbor, anything in its way, big boats, wooden docks, were just turned upside down like toys. And you could hear the cracking and the crushing of metal and wood. And people were running up the hills trying not to get caught in it. Luckily, nobody was injured, but in Crescent City up on the Oregon border, their entire harbor was destroyed, and there was someone killed who was swept into the water. So this was actually, even though our damage was minuscule compared to Japan, this was the worst tsunami to hit California since 1964, biggest in almost 50 years. And luckily, we knew about it because of this system of high-tech buoys that the federal government has in the ocean. We knew when it was going to arrive, how big the waves were going to be, where to evacuate people from. And in the last week or so, those buoys have been in the news because the Obama administration, as part of its cost-cutting measures, has proposed reducing the funding for the maintenance and the operations of these buoys, and actually reducing outreach programs, public education programs to help with evacuation maps, signs on the coast, those kind of things.
That doesn't seem to make logical sense, because it's the government that will have to stand behind whatever damages, and if the less people who know about this, won't that skyrocket that cost on the other end?
You could make that argument, and that's what some critics are saying. Some Congress people have begun to push back on this. When I talk to the folks at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which runs the National Weather Service, which runs these buoys, they said, well, it's not as bad as it sounds, because when there's an earthquake in the ocean, we know where it is because of seismic stations all over the place, at universities, at federal and state governments, and we can run the size of it into computer models and estimate these things. But then the scientists told me, wait a minute, the only way to really know whether there's a tsunami is when it goes past these buoys, and they send satellite signals, so you instantaneously get a lot more data to actually confirm it. NOAA said, well, we're going to have some other countries help us save costs by maintaining these, but they don't have agreements yet with other countries.
How much are they supposed to save by cutting this program?
The total amount of money saved on the buoys is $1 million a year out of a budget of about 10 or 11 million a year. And then on these education and outreach programs, it's about 3.6 million on a total budget of 10 or 11. So you're going to save about $4 or $5 million a year total.
It seems kind of chump change in the federal.
That's what critics are saying, and underlying this is the fact that after the big tsunami in 2004 in Indonesia, which people, I think Americans still don't fully understand the scale of that thing. There were 230,000 people killed in Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and other countries in that area. That is more people than were killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Died in that tsunami. And the reason they died, a big reason, was that they had no warning systems. They were all on the beach, they were in low-lying areas, they couldn't get away. And after that, the Bush administration, to its credit, said, we have to make sure our warning system works well. And they put money into beefing up the buoy system from 6 to 39 buoys. But less than 10 years later, we're letting the thing go to seed.
So it's not exactly the first or only public safety program that's proposed for cuts. Look at food safety and all that, but I want you to say something about another kind of related issue a year after Fukushima. What effect has this had on our nuclear industry?
Yeah. Sure. Well, a big part of the news there was the meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear plant, and interestingly, it's had a huge effect in Japan. There are 54 nuclear power plants in Japan. All but 2 of them are closed, completely shut down. They provide a third of Japan's electricity, and they're not running. And the Japanese are turning off lights in offices. They are burning a lot more fossil fuels. They are doing all sorts of really extreme conservation measures, turning off the air conditioning in the summer to get through. And politically, the government doesn't have the support to turn them back on yet. In America, it's meant almost nothing. In fact, the Obama administration, through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission last month, approved licensing 2 new nuclear power plants, the construction of 2 new ones in Georgia. It's the first time since 1978 that we've approved new nuclear power plants. And the reason, I believe, for this is that When you look at electricity needs for America going forward, and you look at the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it's very hard to get there taking nuclear power off the table. Nuclear power provides 20% of the power and 20% of the electricity in the United States. Solar, wind combined is 2%.
Well, where are we now in the process? Is this going to happen?
You mean the cuts to the buoys? No, I think some Congress people are going to jump in and put the money back in. If you made me bet, that's what I'd say.
Well, as we mentioned, another major effect of the quake in Japan was the triple meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. It raised questions about whether a similar incident could happen here in the U.S., where there are more than 100 nuclear plants. Many are reaching the end of their approved lifespan, and there could be problems with the way the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, oversees relicensing of these plants. Here's an excerpt about the Diablo Canyon plant from the documentary Danger Zone.
Zones in the world. Many think it's only a matter of time until the big one.
This may be the facility that, if something does go wrong, could be our Fukushima, not because of a tsunami, but because of a massive earthquake that could cause catastrophic damage.
State Senator Sam Blakesley represents the district that includes the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, considered the most seismically dangerous in the country.
And if we're talking about something over a magnitude 7,
Blakesley knows the devastating power of earthquakes better than most. He has a PhD in earthquake studies, and he's been urging the NRC to take seismic threats more seriously. In 2008, he became even more alarmed when a seismologist with the U.S. Geological Survey discovered a new earthquake fault.
Looking offshore, I found a number of small earthquakes that previously had looked kind of scattered, actually lined up along a line that ran basically right along the coastline near the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant.
Jean Hardebeck's research points to a dangerous possibility. She says that the newly discovered shoreline fault could combine with another fault called the Hasgri to create a powerful earthquake right at the plant. A similar scenario surprised Japanese seismologists at Fukushima. But the owners of Diablo Canyon, Pacific Gas and Electric, say there's nothing to worry about. They say Hardebeck's analysis is flawed and the plant can operate safely for years.
Having now completed a very rigorous and thorough feasibility study, I'm both pleased and excited to announce we are officially beginning the process to seek license renewal for the Diablo Canyon facility.
I could not understand why the utility was racing to relicense before the seismic information came forward. It was almost as though they were afraid of what they would find.
In the wake of the Japanese disaster, Blakesley called for hearings and confronted an NRC official.
And we're now in a situation where we have information about a shoreline fault, a new fault in my district, next to my constituents, and you're telling me you're just going to continue business as usual and not delay to get the information before you do your site safety review. And that's unacceptable.
The shoreline fault is well below the ground acceleration that the plant is designed to.
How do you know that?
Based on the scientific studies that have been performed to date.
By whom?
There was a number of folks that were involved with that. PG&E was a party to that. We expect licensees to do those studies.
But relying on information from licensees to determine if a plant is safe may put the public at risk. These PG&E documents, obtained by the Center for Investigative Reporting, reveal that despite their public claims of safety, PG&E's own seismologists have considered the implications of a magnitude 7.2 earthquake along the shoreline fault. This graph shows the ensuing shaking could exceed what the plant is designed to withstand.
The problem is, with the magnitude 7.2, you're getting perilously close to the limits of the facility.
But in its formal report to the NRC, PG&E sent another graph, this one showing no seismic concerns. They told the NRC that because the shoreline fault is segmented, it can't rupture with nearby faults, and therefore a larger earthquake at the plant is impossible. Hardebeck says that way of thinking doesn't add up.
The data I'm looking at, it actually doesn't make sense. The earthquakes along the shoreline fault and very clearly go all the way to the Hosgray Fault.
PG&E declined our request for an interview, but in a written statement said, Diablo Canyon was designed and constructed with seismic safety in mind, and components of the facility were tested to withstand probable ground motions resulting from nearby faults.
We should be asking the question, why isn't that work being done by other seismic organizations which have no direct financial interest or benefit in how or when that data is viewed, reviewed, and interpreted? One of the reasons there isn't that kind of rigorous third-party independent oversight is because the NRC doesn't ask it, doesn't demand it, doesn't seek it.
Well, Danger Zone was produced by the Center for Investigative Reporting and Al Jazeera and can be viewed in full on kqed.org/thisweek. The chairman of the NRC recently said there is no evidence of an immediate safety issue from the newly identified fault, and PG&E agreed to temporarily suspend relicensing of Diablo Canyon and conduct advanced 3D seismic imaging. Well, my thanks to all three of you for joining us here this evening. And that's all for tonight. Next week, Attorney General Kamala Harris will be our guest. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.